Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again at a meeting organised by the EETT. I'm going to adopt a slightly different approach. There are always two ways of addressing a policy question. You can either focus upon the situation you are in now and try and work out how to get out of it, or alternatively, you can adopt a different approach, which is to look forward to how things might be in 20 years' time, and then try and infer backwards from that what you should be doing now. I'm not suggesting that the latter approach, which I'm going to adopt, is necessarily better, but just the same, in the interest of variety, having already heard the very considerable difficulties which face us in dealing with the digital dividend problem, I hope that by focusing upon what the future might bring, at least it would convince some of the audience, at least, in the worthwhileness of making the effort. So I'm going to adopt an approach which is sometimes called, and I can safely use this word in Greece, a teleological one, as opposed to a geneticist approach, which you start from present. Now, just think what's happened over the past 25 years. There's been a quite astonishing change in technology. The kind of networks that we had 25 years ago, which were largely confined to a telecoms network and a cable network, both in their individual silos, have now given way to networks capable of almost unimaginable speed, unimaginable 25 years ago. And moreover, the crucial change has been the addition of very powerful wireless networks. Compression has increased the capacity of the spectrum, and so we now have fibre to the home, we have advanced cable networks, we have 3G, 3G+, we have LTE, and all this within the next few years. In other words, we're really talking about, over the space of, say, 5 or 10 years ahead, in effectively all member states within the European Union, of quite extraordinary possibilities for technological competition among networks. And what we should be thinking about in these circumstances, in my view, is how we can utilize these opportunities, particularly associated with wireless networks, where barriers to entry are so much less considerable than they are in the case of fixed networks, how we can use these possibilities in order to achieve a degree of deregulation, greater reliance upon the animal spirits of investors, the creation of investment races, all directed at the delivery of multi-purpose high-speed broadband networks. It's an extraordinary opportunity. I'm aware that in saying this against the current financial background, I might be accused of mindless optimism, but let's suppose that within a year or two we manage to get out of the current doldrums and recapture something more equivalent to the golden age of the last 15 years, and consider what might be done with the investment possibilities that are created. Nor do I think we should focus entirely upon the implications of this for commercial operations, because the achievement of social objectives in this new world, the opportunities for those achievements, are really very considerable. I can think of two ways in which the situation is likely to change. Already many member states are beginning to think about the possibility of creating some kind of broadband universal service obligation. This is clearly not going to be in any way akin to the current universal service obligation for voice calls, which, because of its history, is imposed upon one operator only, a fixed operator. If we are going to have a broadband universal service obligation, and we heard from the Minister how important it is to avoid the creation of a digital divide within a country, if we are going to have that, it's going to have to be done on the basis of some kind of competitive process involving technological neutrality, fixed and wireless networks. All of these things will have to be deployed in order to achieve that key social objective. A second point, which came up in another speech that we've already heard, is the implications for public service broadcasting. We think at the moment of public service broadcasting as a regime in which particular broadcasters, that's to say transmitters, are prioritized, and they have access by construction to the overwhelming majority of the population. But if we are going to move to this multi-channel world, if we are going to move to this multi-platform world, then public service broadcasting objectives will have to be achieved by placing programming and content upon all the networks that are available. Now, in the future, I would be inclined to place my bet, I must say, upon wireless technologies, because I think that the capabilities that they have for the use of portable devices and for mobility are going to, in some way, outweigh the benefits associated with the higher speeds that will be possible with fixed networks. But the point is, it's not a view that you should take seriously into consideration, because if we do create an opportunity in the future for the development of a large number of networks, then what will determine the outcome will be consumers' choice. We'll be living in a world of consumer sovereignty, where what the citizens of Greece and other member states want will actually determine what happens. Now, what flows from this, and I'm doing this as quickly as I can, I think there's one very important economic principle which flows from it, which is this: if you are going to operate in this kind of world, you want to try and avoid privileging particular networks. If you distort competition among the various networks for the delivery of particular services, then the implications of this are going to be, first of all, that distortion of competition, and secondly, inevitably some kind of inefficiencies, because the privileged networks will then be used in circumstances where the same results could be achieved rather more economically by other networks. So it's a very important economic principle, and it's formulated in the words, as far as possible, don't mess with input prices. Always ensure that you aren't distorting the conditions of competition in the output market where people are buying services, broadcasting services, internet services or whatever, that you aren't distorting those by decisions that you make about how you allocate inputs. And of course that leads me straight into the subject of today's discussion, which is what should we do about the allocation of spectrum which is freed as a result of the digital dividend. Now, I greatly welcomed Professor Alexandridis' observation that it's very important in addressing this decision with stakeholders to try and be as clear as possible about the situation that's going to pertain in relation to other bands, because the need which people have for digital dividend spectrum is going to depend in large degree on what happens at 900, 1800 and higher frequencies, which we know are capable of providing broadly the same kinds of services, at least as far as broadband data services are concerned. Now, it follows from what I said that there is a lot to be said in the circumstances for adopting a policy in which the various competing service providers bid for, through an auction process, the spectrum which is released, and they'll make their bids obviously on the basis of what they think their customers will be willing to pay for the services which they provide. So having a process for dealing with the digital dividend which causes spectrum to gravitate towards the uses in which it's most valuable is, I think, a particular requirement. This should certainly not interfere with the need to ensure that certain basic services, current services, are maintained universally. But beyond that, I think a process which permits flexibility so that mistakes made in the allocation can be retrieved, which allows competition among competing users, is desirable. Now, in that context, I don't think anybody would want to cavil with the notion of a degree of soft harmonization occurring. And I use that phrase to describe, perhaps slightly inaccurately, the clustering approach which is adopted by the European Commission as expressed by Mr. Niepold. It's not hard harmonization where rules are laid down about what different frequencies must be used for. It's soft harmonization. In the terminology of some recent policy discussions, it's a kind of nudging process, trying to point out to people where benefits can be achieved and then expecting them to follow that in order to gain it. Now, how might this be achieved in practice? Well, my fellow panelist, Mr. Conway, is going to describe the approach to the digital dividend taken in the UK, I believe. So I will defer a description myself, because that gives you some kind of indication, I believe, of how this might be done. Now, finally, I must say I was very impressed and gratified to hear Professor Alexandridis' account of the EETT strategy. It contained, as it seemed to me, a large number of extremely positive elements. I can't list them all. I think, Professor, you distinguished something like 22 different aspects of it. But if you'll excuse me, I'd just like to indicate ones which I think are of particular importance. First of all, as will be immediately apparent from what I've said, I'm very pleased with the emphasis upon technological neutrality and the emphasis upon investment and innovation. I think it's the focus upon looking at other uses of spectrum within the strategy is extremely important. One of my preoccupations in looking at spectrum issues has been the question of finding a balance between public sector use of spectrum and commercial use of spectrum. And I think that looking at those problems as a whole, rather than in isolation, is particularly important. I guess it's very important to acknowledge in the presentation the emphasis upon the proposition that there should be no democratic deficit in the decisions that are made about the digital dividend. But then finally, I think the key point that emerged in your very ambitious agenda is the need for speed. Spectrum decisions throughout the ages have taken periods of time which have delayed the emergence of new services, and the damage which that has done to end users, not only households but also the economy as a whole, has been enormous. So I wish you well in your endeavours. Thank you.